Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we have Michael Sahota with us to talk about mob programming as a mechanism to solve other problems, dissolving the ego and increasing team function, prioritizing development of production capacity, and improvement in relationships, engagements, and trust. Or we evolve to whatever we end up talking about. But first, Michael, would you please go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we can get into the discussion.
I think I'm recovering from having an ego, and I'm still not fully out of through the recovery program. And I think that's kind of the news headline for my journey. I really started out as going through engineering, then computer science, and then had a job as a software developer, management roles, and got involved with this whole agile thing, and worked as a trainer and consultant from that perspective. And so that took me, and this is where I've been focused really for the last over a decade, is on culture and leadership and understanding like what are the things that we do, mob programming or pair programming as examples of practices, but what is the actual effect? Like, why is it working? How do we get it to work well to actually allow us to really, overcome this limitation that you all have of our egoic way of functioning and function in a very, very different way and use that, in sense of these practices, mob programming and so on, as a way to heal ourselves and heal together as a team or a community.
Nice. Fantastic. Yeah. I'm super fascinated by this topic and because I've seen similar things in my mobbing experiences, but I'm really curious to hear your take on how you've seen mob programming impact the ego of others and yourself. So what comes to mind first for you?
Yeah, so I just want to be really, really clear, like totally 100% honest and transparent that, maybe I'll go back to my intention. My intention for having this session is that people understand what they're doing at a much, much deeper level that allows them to get bigger benefits. That's kind of like the intention I'm holding for this session. And with that said, I have never, ever, other than maybe in a conference session, sometime participated in mob programming. I've done pair programming in my career. I've, managed teams that were doing pair programming. And so I know what the essence of it is, actually something that transcends, right? And it starts with pair programming, and mob programming is actually an extension of that. And it's this understanding that I have from having gone on my own deep personal growth journey of understanding what the ego is and coming to peace with it, and studying in, India and other, different lineages and traditions for human evolution around the planet, that I bring this kind of like, and this is what I want to share here, is what is really going on when we're in these technologies. How do we kind of lean into embrace them so it's something quite different? And just to give you some context, what I'm sharing here is really an emergent co-creation from, maybe I don't know when the first conversation started, but with Woody Zuhl and Llewellyn Falco at various conferences, every year we kind of pick up the conversation where we left the previous year. And so what I could see is that there are these amazing outcomes that happen through pair programming, through mob programming, that people don't really understand, that the outcome is, the code is not the outcome. Even the learning is not necessarily the outcome. There's something much bigger that's happening that's the real value. And I think that's what we're kind of hoping to kind of dive into here.
So what do you find those things to be, or can you expand on that thought a little bit?
Yeah, so let's just take something very, very simple. We all have an ego. We all are suffering from, various levels of lack of psychological safety. And so we want to speak and kind of get our way and have our idea be important so that we elevate our status. We feel like an artificial sense of higher level of psychological safety, right? That's kind of this game going on in all of us. Now, what happens when you do something where you put people in a situation where they need to take turns? They need to listen to other people. What that does is it's giving people really a forcing function for their part of that egoic part of themselves to get quietened down, so they can start to understand that the collective intelligence is greater than their individual intelligence, that there's value in learning and growing as a team. And so what happens when we use these practices, and this is kind of the important thing that I'm hoping people can lean into more and cultivate, is that we're really doing it as a way to get that egoic part of ourselves to think we're always right, and our idea is better and blah, 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 blah. And you've seen this come up in mobbing sessions where, different people are going through different psychological experiences as they're letting go of their attachment to their perspective of how things should go, or their perspective of what correct is. And so what I'm really trying to highlight is this is a psychological process, and we start to understand what's going on for us. We can actually be much more, I'd say, empathetic and supportive with the awareness that everyone in a mob program or pair program session is going through a psychological process. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. This is kind of like, all people think, well, we're just getting together and writing code. Blah, blah, blah. But no, for us to let go of our idea, that's our ego tells us we're right, we're smart. And so for me to listen to you about your idea, I have to let that clinging, that fear-based clinging die, and open up to the possibility that, oh, I don't know where this is going to go, but maybe this will take me somewhere beyond where I've been before, or what I thought was correct. And let me just see what happens. And what that does is, in these moments of kind of isolated healing from these sessions, that translates out into the world for the rest of the time when we're not in that mob session, where we have more empathy, more understanding, less attached to our ideas. And so I see this technology as really a generative technology for healing the individual ego, and thus enabling far more valuable team behaviors the rest of the time.
Yeah. That really resonates with me quite a bit. And it's I almost feel like it's like a deeper version of what I've heard some DevOps practitioners say, where it's like, if you think someone's crazy, go have lunch with them, right? Like someone else in the company. And out of the process of just having lunch with them and talking with them, you come to learn that they're not crazy, and that, you come to hear their background and their motivations and things. And I feel like, if you think someone's crazy, go pair a mob with them, kind of leads to a deeper version of the empathy where you let go, right? That feeling of letting go is still difficult sometimes, even for someone more experienced in mobbing, like myself. Because you're like, I see a path for the code or for the thing we're solving, right? But to just be like, you know what? It's this other person's turn. Let's see it through. And even if it doesn't work, and more often than not, it does work. But even if it doesn't work, you're like, wow, that was actually a really reasonable experiment, and they're not crazy, And we learned something very valuable from that. And the need to have my idea go first, or my idea to be experimented first, letting that go opens the door for learning in a deeper way from others. Yeah. I'm not sure if that's where you're going, but that's what comes to mind for me.
Oh yeah, no, that you're totally vibing on this. So that's what we'd call, there's a tension between production and production capability, right? Like we're just trying to get the best production out of it, we're focused on one goal in a mob session. But there's a cultural aspect in healthy mobbing where the focus, and it's a slider, right? We can focus all the way in production or all the way in production capability. If you focus on all the way in production capability, it means that you, as the most expert person, let people take a wrong path and go on their trip with them to create a bad outcome, or like an outcome that doesn't really solve the problem, the production goal, because it'll allow them to learn. And I think that's one thing that is really this kind of fundamental cultural shift from the traditional world we live into these more evolutionary, more adaptive worlds, is that we understand that learning is a key aspect of moving to our higher performance organization. Like if people aren't learning, we're not going to improve our performance capability, our production capability. So, and this is something that, might even be a healthy experiment for people to try in mob sessions, which is, all right, before we start this session, where's our balance between production and production capability for this session? And actually run explicit experiments. Well, is it 50-50? In which case, if I'm an expert, I'm going to try to, half the time-ish, move it in the healthier direction, versus half the time kind of let it go to a direction that even if I am pretty sure it'll fail, right? And so that's where, there's this spectrum, and it really depends on, then this mob session is not even really the question of that mob session is what, and this is kind of the bigger cultural perspective of mobbing as part of a larger team perspective. As a team, what is the balance we hold between production capability? Like, can a junior member focus on a specific thing they're not really fluent in, which will be slow and involve a lot of learning, be really beneficial for them, but it will not, let's say, help us achieve hitting, our quarterly goal or whatever it is. And so this is like, really, I see like as a really beautiful place for, with an understanding, like a more culturally aware understanding of what we're really doing when we're doing a mob session, to say, well, what is the balance?
Right. Yeah, so it reminds me of a couple of things. One thing is, like, in my early days of mobbing, there'd be a period of time where it was like, oh, I just know where to go, and then I would say it, and then somebody else on the team would be like, I wish you didn't give me the answer, and then they kind of came up with the term learning theft. It was a little bit of learning theft, because now I'm not going to remember it because it wasn't a struggle. So that certainly resonates with me. And then I also think that there's a lot to that. I think earlier on as well, we talked a lot about, if there's a disagreement on the team about what direction we should go in, if the more senior person cannot show why we're going in a specific direction, then we always take the most junior person's idea. And so I think both of those things have like deeply ingrained this into the culture as well, especially if you have somebody that just wants to take the reins and go. And so I think an outcome of that ends up being, diving deeper into that concept of letting go of ego and providing those learning opportunities.
Yeah. So I think what you're describing is what we call like a high performance meeting protocol. Like, it's like a really basic idea is that senior people go last and everyone gets a chance to share in reverse seniority order. And when you do it that way, you're focusing on building everyone's status up. So they're important. They have a voice. They can contribute. So their psychological safety goes up. Their sense of self-worth and self-esteem goes up. Their motivation goes up. All these things happen. And I think that's really kind of this very human, psychological phenomenon that comes out of things like either pairing or mobbing, which is kind of an amped up version, because there we really have to listen. In mobbing, if there are 5 people, I only get 1/5 of the time, right? So
Right.
the other 4 parts, I'm listening to other people about what they think is important, right? And that's what helps kind of indoctrinate this humility to listen to others. But it also gives a space for even the most junior person to have their voice, which elevates their status so that they're able to feel like more like a part of the team, more able to contribute, right? And so I think there's the value of the actual activity of mobbing is much more of a psychological human thing than it is about getting code out. And I think that's maybe the kind of the weird idea. And maybe you guys already have this idea, but I haven't heard that expressed.
Yeah. I mean, I think,
dramatic.
I mean, I think for me, it's always a both and with that. Like, code does come out, and it was way cleaner and way more effective than non-pair mob for me in my past. And I think it's just because of, I like how you highlighted earlier, the natural process of taking turns. And like, whether it's juniors go first or seniors go first, I think that amplifies things. But even just the act of taking turns with experiments, you'll get both learning time and innovation and effective code put out, so to speak. And you can get into whether code output is really an important factor or not, or is it providing value to customers, or in an innovative learning culture type thing. But I think even if you have more traditional metrics, so to speak, on output, I've always seen mobs, in my experience, do quite well even with those metrics and learning along the way. It's not like, oh, it's kind of reminds me of refactoring. Like, you don't separate refactoring from the work. It's part of the work, right? You don't separate learning from the work. It's kind of like, oh, no, we can't do any learning right now. We're just doing pure production mobbing. You know what I mean? Like, don't learn anything. We're just going to implement, And so, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. I think the way I'd summarize that from a cultural perspective, in a traditional world, which is kind of this ego-based template that we've locked into for thousands of years on this planet, we're going to focus on production and usually ignore production capability, ignore learning. I mean, that's kind of the default, kind of the traditional business we're in. And really what we're seeing in places where people can do mob programming is that there's an and. It's like, well, yeah, we're getting production out of it, but we're also getting production capability out of it. And I think what I guess really the biggest, from a cultural perspective, really the only thing that really matters is whether people are engaged and motivated and are able to contribute, right? At a level of like larger scale production of what's happening in your team. And that effect from mob programming, because we're getting this reign of the ego, we're really emphasizing, I'd probably say, like a high emphasis on production capability over production, right? If we're just trying to get, something out to ship a deadline, you might not choose mob programming, or maybe you would. I don't have enough experience to say, well, and it depends on the team and so on. But really, it's this kind of over indexing on production capability, this over indexing on learning, leads to such a really just from what I've seen, like just a beautiful flowering in the individuals and the team culture that leads to such a productivity gain for the rest of the time. It's just totally worth the investment.
Yeah, you can spend more time on production, but you have a soul draining experience where you do the same thing over and over again forever, and over this, more of a dialogue happening between individuals to then approach a higher level of productivity faster, right?
Yeah. And so I think there's something, very deep, and this kind of goes beyond, really kind of beyond the workplace, and really just talking about, people as the core fabric of creating in our organizations. And, I remember the story Llewellyn told about how people would just voluntarily get together. He told the session on Sundays or something like that. And then, people came there, and what the sense I got out of it, hearing him describe this experience, is actually people coming together to these sessions because it's almost like the only space, or one of the few spaces, where they could really be seen, where they could really speak, where they could really, have that level of acceptance as in terms of their, I mean, this is really kind of the tragedy of the world that we live in, right? But it's kind of speaking to that. There's this essence of mob programming that far transcends this idea of, okay, let's get together and write code and do better code and learn through the process, right? It's just something really kind of, energetic, psychological, and non-tangible, but is almost like that's the most valuable attribute in the larger picture of creating products.
Yeah, for sure. And I will withhold the tangent and geeking out completely, but I will humor myself a little bit there.
No, go for it. Go for it. That's fun.
Yeah, I think mobbing taps into this ancient thing that you've seen throughout all history of what small groups can do together, whether that's Socratic discussion or discipleship groups, or, back, if you go back to effective education hundreds of years ago, it wasn't hundreds of people in a classroom listening to one person talk. It was like a small group of people, in a graduate program, kind of thing. And it's where you're not just hearing someone else's ideas, but you're sharing ideas, and there's this give and take. And then there's, you're co-creating, which is very satisfying, but you're also learning. You're finding flaws in yourself, kind of like dissolving the ego, as you said. And once you open up to that can be quite satisfying. Painful at first to learn all my flaws. But as you work through them as a group, that can be quite satisfying. And I think a lot of these things aren't possible in a group of 100 or a group of 20 even. And it's certainly not possible alone. So there's this people working together closely on something in this small group untaps a lot of things that aren't possible otherwise, I think, in my experience. So, yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful summary. And there's a thought that kind of sparked from that, which is, when we're undertaking this activity and we're actually moving out of this egoic way of functioning that, kind of lives in the traditional world and so on, we're actually coming closer to the truth of who we are, right? The ego is not who we are. Like, we're not, like, none of us made the decision. Yeah, I want to interrupt people. I want to judge people. I want to think my idea is better. I want to jump in. I want to have my solution. That's not us, right? That's not really the truth of who we are. So there's an intrinsic element as we start to shed that aspect of us that's not us, we can call it the ego or conditioning or whatever we want to call it, but that we're actually moving to closer to the truth of who we are, which itself is very, very fulfilling for people. So that's why I just want to highlight that with really, there's something much, much deeper going on, far beyond just like the surface level of practice. Yeah,
for sure. You highlighted earlier that mobbing has been a way to dissolve the ego. Is there any particular stories that come to mind, for yourself or for others, or a team you've been on where you've kind of seen this process unravel with pairing or mobbing?
Yeah. So most of our work is really centered around leadership training and coaching and helping leaders create an organizational environment where people can actually function, which is, the kind of the basic thing. So you can do mobbing, so you can do agile, so you can do, all these more progressive practices. Without the environment, doesn't work. And I'd say the universal challenge, and I'll just talk about myself, this attachment we have to our own ideas, right? This runs very, very deep. And from a physiological perspective, like the neural network that's holding my idea, for me to let go of that idea and move to a new idea, there's an entire restructuring of that entire neural network. So the actual physiological mechanism of the brain, which is connected with the ego, the ego-mind system, is very, very defensive of our ideas. So just kind of like the single kind of biggest pro tip of anyone in a mobbing session is just really watch out for where you're attached to your ideas. Like just watch for it. Watch for when you say, oh, we shouldn't do that, we should go this way, right? Because when you're doing that, you're saying, I know and they don't, and my idea is better, right? But how do we know our idea is better? Who's deciding that? We're just basing it on our experience. And when we base it just on our experience, we're discounting the experience of everyone else, right? And when we're discounting everyone else, we're saying their voice doesn't matter. Their thoughts don't matter. And that's where, when we act on that impulse, this is like kind of the first edge. We talk about this as a pattern of unlearning, right? There's a whole technology for how we do that effectively. But what this practice does is demands people start to become aware of their attachment and not act on it, right? And and I think it shows up in in the sessions that are really clean. People may have wanting an idea of to go in a different direction, but don't act on it. Don't speak that. And what that does then again is it helps the individual who's working through that, but it also gives the benefit to everybody else because they're no longer getting interrupted or taken in a different direction or so on, right? So this is a huge aspect of our egoic functioning. I'm right, I know. And when we start to say, okay, well, I have an direction of how this goes, but this whole, the whole session before me was going this other direction. I'm just going to go with that rather than trying to, redirect in a different direction and so on. So this is a very real thing going on all the time for all of us, right? Whether it's our partner, whether it's our kids, whether it's our boss, whether it's somebody on our team, right? This is like this kind of universal pattern that we're all working through.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're right. And this is an area of personal struggle for me, is that even because sometimes people are right? Like, so for example, the bug is either on line 5 or it's not, right? There's a deterministic answer to that question that we can find out collectively, right? But there are ways to present a way to discover that collectively, that are dismissive of others, and then there are ways that still share the idea but are open for other ideas for feedback, and so I think one flaw I've had with is how to share ideas in a way that don't destroy other people's initiative to share their idea, right? And so I'm open to general advice either of you two have on that.
Well, the really easy one is everyone shares their ideas first.
Yeah.
And the most senior people go last. It's just a very, very simple pattern.
Yeah.
Right. Because you guys probably have heard of this. It's called the hippo effect. Highest paid person's opinion in the room, either formally or informally. There's always a pecking order and a status. And when we, as the more senior people, go last, we tell the other people that, oh, you are important. Your voice matters. And psychological safety travels in parallel with what we call equal voice. When people are allowed to express their voice, there's an environment where their voice matters, that their psychological safety goes up, their status goes up, their sense of self-worth and self-importance goes up. So they're more engaged, more motivated. Physiologically, when we're safer, we get more blood supply to our frontal cortex. So they're actually smarter. So, really having the senior people learn to shut up is or the people in leadership learn to speak last, like just shut up and speak last, is a very, very important, simple practice. But this goes directly against the ego, right? The ego wants, I want to speak, I want to have my idea, I want to look smart, I want to be important. I mean, that's all the ego, right? And the ego is what blocks us from, moving from this me, I'm important, I'm smart, to we, this more expansive, inclusive thing that allows us to actually, as a group, function at far, far better levels. So that's really the kind of easy thing to spot is, really just making sure, okay, great, let's share in reverse seniority order if you're having a discussion or a breakout or anything like that. So the senior people go last. The only exception to that is when people are ready to admit errors or faults or what they've done wrong, then we as leaders want to go first to set the tone, to say, this is what I did wrong. So it depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, we're all going to go over everything that went wrong recently, and I'm going to go last. So that reminds me a little bit of, there was this idea of everyone draws, which is like if you're doing an architecture diagram, just like everybody draw silently and then share afterwards, like that. That certainly helps. And then I think also that the process of like navigating the navigator, and in remote environments, like chatting to the navigator, where somebody might have the idea, but somebody else needs to practice navigation itself. But yeah, if there's like a technical correct answer, then certainly it may become more about how do you teach another person to have thought of the result themselves rather than coming up with the result yourself. And so it's like, what was missing from their mental model that didn't lead them to the same conclusion? So all of those things are I'm fond of. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. You actually tweaked a thought, which is that part of this whole journey is when people step up to become more responsible as individuals and more mature as individuals, and their egos more under control, and they're feeling safer, then very naturally as an outcome, or most of us actually have to learn this, we're open to asking for help, right?
Right.
And this is really very interesting, because when you have team members who aren't in that place, they're not going to ask for help if they need it, right? You see, so what happens is you can be in a very clean situation where people are more mature. I'll do it over here in evolutionary side. People are more mature. When they need help, they're going to ask for help, whether it's a technical thing or a directional thing. They say, hey, I'm feeling kind of lost here. Could someone give me a hint or something like that, right? When the people are more mature and taking responsibility for their own ability to grow and function, then it becomes really clean. Then someone says, okay, great, here's a tip, and then they can keep on going. When someone's over here on the unhealthy side and they don't do that, they're more kind of in their ego, in their fear, and they're wanting to figure it out themselves and blah, 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 then they're not going to ask for the help. And then somebody who can see what's going on will be able to offer help, but then this kind of creates this bind. Well, do I just kind of move in and like say, hey, there's an easy solution here, or do they just let them go? But the thing here is that we want to make sure in any of these situations, there's a feedback mechanism, because of this person's making an error, right? And if you're doing any kind of learning environment, there'll be a post-operational review where there's a chance for it to say, hey, in this moment, this is what happened. This is what you did. This is the choice you made. This is the consequence, right? And that's where, again, it requires a higher level of people's maturity, because whether you do it live in the middle of the session, or you wait till the post-session debrief, however that's structured, that otherwise you're missing a learning opportunity for this person, right? And again,
Right.
That depends on a lot of variables, right? But it depends really on the maturity of the whole team, right? If people are more on this side of the equation, that's fair game. You say, hey, you might want to think about this, and they're not going to be offended. They're just going to consider it and take the advice or not, right? There's a whole pattern called the advice process, and it's a way for people to really step into, okay, when do I make the decision myself? And when do I make the decision with advice from others, and starting to develop that maturity to think about that decision.
Yeah, and I think it does have a natural maturation process. And it reminds me of what you were saying earlier with humility, because I think if you're able to mob in a healthy way, it almost necessitates humility, because if you've had healthy mobbing or pairing sessions and you go into it with the assumption that, let's say you're mobbing or pairing on topic A, that you're an expert who makes little to no mistakes and you have nothing to improve, right? Let's just say you go into it with that assumption. Typically that will get destroyed pretty quickly, because someone very soon will teach you something and one of your experiments will fail. At least that's 99% of my mobbing experiments, that you know how often you fail, you express an idea that fails is pretty often, or you had a way that worked and maybe it would get the job done, but then someone enhances it and teaches you an aspect of it that you've never thought of before, that would have led to latent issues that wouldn't be discovered till much later. So I think it's kind of a constant humility baking process. I feel like I guess maybe that's kind of what you're getting at. It's really hard for the ego to survive healthy pairing or mobbing. It's like it's destroyed.
Yeah. Well, there's nowhere to run.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so I think that's what I'm trying to express, is that there's this effect going on that inhibits or prevents someone operating from their ego, or when they're doing it, it just makes it very self-evident to them that there's something going wrong, and that this kind of epiphenomenon of the structure of it is actually what creates the kind of, I guess probably say the deepest, the most significant value of the activity.
Nice.
Right. So I think like the flip side of all of this is like production, or prioritizing development over development of production capability. Do you have any thoughts on what that balance might be, or how that regulates? What's the reinforcing or balancing loops in that system? Like how are we deciding, as organizations, how can somebody decide whether or not to invest more in one side or the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we can see that at both extremes, it doesn't work, right? If we're just focused on production over here, our production capability is just going to go down over time. Right. It just will. I mean, that's most traditional environments are in that situation. When we overinvest in production capability, well, is there such a thing? What happens? It means that we're no longer focused on getting results done. We're just focused on our own learning for the sake of learning, and learning things that are not relevant. So I think most organizations are really comfortable with a quarterly planning cycle, yearly planning cycle. This is what we're trying to achieve for the quarter. And so the view that we recommend is, well, we're going to focus on elements of production capability that will give us the payback within this time frame. Right? Or payback within the 1 year time frame if you're really kind of in a, have more runway, financially, and pressure from the executives and so on. But certainly we'd want to see returns within like about a quarter. And what my experience with this, though, is that we see the returns much quicker. We've seen the returns, like, in accounting terms, it's called payback. When does the time we invest in production capability give us the benefit in production? And the experience I've had with when teams are putting in, 20% on production capability, maybe 30%, 10%, that the payback happens very, very quickly. And I think what's going on then is it's also going back to the maturity of the team to say, okay, well, great, we're going to be responsible as adults to say we're only going to focus on those things where we're going to get the payback, right? Really, I think, for teams, the recommendation we have is, number one, get rid of all the firefighting. That's easy. That's such a big win for production capability. Then, like, work with the team to figure out what are the leaky buckets, where are we wasting our time. I mean, this is the intention of retrospectives, but they ever really fully enact on what these outputs are. But if you've gotten rid of all the fires, you fixed all the leaky buckets, then you get in this question of, well, where do we want to focus our time and energy? Then you get into, how do we get ahead of the game? What are the newer technologies? What are the things where we can, leapfrog from where we are? That's where you're going to have things like, creativity labs where people are, trying to, do product extensions and build whatever feature you want. That's where you can get kind of crazy like that. That's maybe stage 4. The stage 3 is, we'll look at the incoming pipeline of work, incoming pipeline for the next quarter, the next year. Where do we need to develop as a team so we can get the most production out in this next quarter? Right. That's kind of the, and then you can go into things about innovation and creativity and, labs to create stuff. But we always want to focus on investing in a sequenced order to maximize the ROI. Because when we maximize the ROI, our production capability is going to go up. So we have more to invest. Right. So we can still keep our production levels and invest in production capability. That's really the secret. Because, people on the business side, they get really, really fussed when they don't get things as soon as they want to, right? And this is like this traditional business pattern of quarterly goals and yearly goals. And, we said we want this, and now we're going to add this other work, but, we still want the thing we wanted. And, where all this dysfunction comes in, where most organizations aren't really able to use a pull model or operate in any way that gives them any reasonable semblance of production capability.
Yeah, so you mentioned a pull model, and I think a lot of that were retrospectives without a focus on lean, I think leads to a little bit of maybe like a pat on the back retrospective or something along those lines, rather than like eliminating waste or other things along those lines. So, I think that all of these external factors, like the quarterly, and you notice big differences, like people working in publicly traded companies versus private companies, and how much long-term thinking they're allowed to do without having their feet held to the fire. And so I've kind of come to this area of like saying, okay, how can we eliminate lean waste, and then like what are the Kaizen activities or the continuous improvement activities that we can go for. So people stuck in like that, say that they're at a publicly traded company and they're constantly held to like quarterly things, and they feel like totally underwater. Like, what is your suggestion to them?
Yeah, so great. I'm going to answer that. I want to touch on something first, which is you're totally on the ball with like, yeah, we need to look at where we're functioning, how we're functioning. And I think the really the most important variable is what percentage of the team's capacity is going towards production capability every iteration. It's really, really simple calculation. We get 30 story points. How many are we spending on production capability? And whether, that'd be one sort of key health indicator, right?
Yeah.
Is it 10%? Is it 20%? What's going on? How much are we actually, you hold a retrospective, if you're not taking action on it, people stop wanting to come to retrospective, which is kind of like, let's say 95% of all agile all over the world. So it's, do we spend time on the production ability? And then do we have a clearly managed backlog? And are we, have an internal product owner, or are we deciding on what are the most important items for us to work on collectively as a team? But if we don't have those things, we're just kind of like doing stuff, right? Yeah. But those are kind of symptoms, I say, for a healthy focus on production capability. The question you said, what do you do when you're in a quarterly thing and you need to meet this goal? It's really, really simple. You look at the goal, what you need to get done in 3 months. You look at what investments in production capability do we do? When do we sequence them? You do them, and then you get more production out. So you get both. It's always possible. And this goes back to, a much deeper pattern of how do we build culture bubbles? How do we keep culture bubbles healthy? How do we do all that? I mean, all the stuff I'm talking about, this is all in our book. That's what our book is about. It's like, how do we actually do this in our real traditional organization where, this is going on, and how to do that in an intelligent way? Because this is the challenge everyone has. It's how do we operate in these evolutionary ways, agile, lean, whatever, in my traditional company that, I've got, the pointy-haired boss, and, they're just giving me scope and date. And it's like, well, what do I do? Yeah. Well, I guess the short answer is, don't tell them you're doing mob programming. Number one, because they'll think you're wasting time. You do it because you're going to get more production out that quarter. So
Yeah.
you're, as a leader of the group, you're making an intelligent business decision, and you have transparency within your group, of course, because transparency is helpful, but you don't have transparency outside. That's like a death warrant for you to get fired. So you just tell people what they want to hear in the language they want to hear it. It's called respect, right? And you're giving them their goal of the highest production. You're just doing it in intelligent ways by investing in production capability, by doing, example of that is doing mob programming. It's just how you do things, and they don't need to know how it's doing. They just want the production, and you're giving them the most intelligent way you can based on your skills and education.
Right. So, for example, a new technology might help us produce something in addition, and the time I spend learning that new technology will likely be outweighed by the resulting production. So, the communication back to the rest of the business is we're working on a way of working faster so we can meet the goal in a more efficient way, which will then lead to benefits for future projects. And that's the scope of which they need that understanding. They don't need to have details about how that's happening.
Yeah, I wouldn't even mention future projects unless they're really more moved out of traditional towards evolutionary. I just say, look, for this project, we need to do this to get it done. If we don't do it this way, it's going to take longer. Right? Because that's the only frame of understanding they have. And, I'll tell you a funny story that was reminded of me when you were sharing that. I had this one, this is like quite a while ago, but I had this one friend of mine, Alistair McKinnell. He's a, really, one of the best software developers I knew in the Toronto area, which is where I used to live. And, he shows me, hey, Michael, I learned how to do this thing. I'm going like, okay. I go, why? He goes, well, you don't understand. Like, I've invested 10 minutes to figure this out, but now this is going to save me 3 seconds every time I do this thing, and I get the benefit for the rest of my life. Yeah. I'm like, oh, wow, that's actually really good math. That's a fantastic ROI. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But when we have that mentality of, oh, I'm going to get this benefit on an ongoing basis, that's what we're speaking about with production capability. It's a really, really good investment strategy. And when we don't do it, we're fools. And when we don't do it, we're hurting our company and hurting our goals of producing by not learning. One of the, there's another, I'll share another story for fun, which is, there's a story of like this team gets together, they spend all year building this product. They're at the Christmas party and there's a fire back at the company and all the servers are gone. All the backups are gone. Everything's gone. And it took them a year to build the product. Okay. So the question is, how long does it take them to build the product now? Is it a year? Is it less than a year? What do you guys think?
My assumption would be that the typing wasn't the bottleneck. So they learned all the things that they needed to learn. So it should be potentially a fraction of the time, unless there were new things they wanted to get in or increase the scope again.
Yeah, but same.
Yeah.
So yeah, fraction of the time. What do you think, Austin?
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, I think that'd be my guess too. Yeah. It depends if they had unit tests or not. Might impact.
Right. Well, it comes back to here. Then, traditional boss says, well, if you guys did it now in 6 months, what were you doing the other 6 months?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, you guys were holding out on us. You're doing it in 6 months now. It's like, but most of the time is learning, and we start to understand most of the time is learning.
Right.
Then this investment in production capability becomes and doing anything else is just a form of insanity, which is what the ego is. Right? It's like, look at the basis here. We have how we understand reality. It's denial, unaware, and distortion. This is the lifeblood of how these traditional organizations are functioning. That's how the ego runs, and the ego's running the show. And it's not a pretty show.
Yeah. And one of the things that strongly attracted me to, start working with Chris or in the environment he had set up was, it takes courage. You use this word culture bubble to, I don't know exactly what you mean by that, but what comes to mind when you say that is someone has to stop the line, right? And do the bold, courageous, risky thing that might get them fired. Because I've just been in organizations before where no one does that. It's kind of like, you start with the worker bee. Well, why are you cutting corners? Well, because my boss is pressuring me. And then you ask the boss, why are you telling him to cut corners? Well, because I'm being pressured by my boss. And you keep going up the chain. Maybe it goes to stakeholders, maybe it goes to a client, maybe it goes to shareholders. But at one point, it's kind of like everyone's just using, a blunt axe because everyone's pressuring everyone in the whole chain. And it takes someone to step back and say, look, give me 5 minutes. I'm going to get out a chainsaw. And if it doesn't work, it's on me or whatever, right? But I've seen that where it takes courage for someone to do that. But rarely people do it, to be honest, in my experience, that they just kind of just like, it's just easier to keep using the blunt axe and not stand up for something, right? And so,
yeah, 100%, totally with you. I think the one difference is that for some people it takes courage because we're standing up and we're saying we're going to do it differently, and we don't advocate that. We advocate a much more sophisticated approach, which is, oh, you want me to focus on production? Hell yeah. Oh, sorry. That's not violation of the rules. But it's like, yeah, we're going to do that. Absolutely. 100%. And then under the covers, you focus on learning. You focus on mob programming to get that production. Because if you don't do that, you're going to get less production. If you skip the unit test, you're going to get less production. Like, it's just, it's just, you just do things in the most intelligent way based on your skills and knowledge and training. That's what you're being paid to do. The fact that you can't share them with it because they don't understand, that's not on you. That's on them.
Right.
Right. So we're suggesting do not ever make a courageous move externally and put yourself in harm's way. That is unintelligent, and you're throwing away your power to do good in the world. Our strong advice is focus on quiet success. There's Lord of the Rings. Keep it secret. Keep it safe. Right. That's when you adopt that mantra, you can make so many healthier decisions because you're not trying to sell them or convince them, because you'll never succeed in that, or very rarely.
Yeah.
At some point, it would become evident, even external metrics would show that your team might be performing better or something along those lines. It is probably better to have some proof in the pudding, already lined up before sharing, right? But I also think like you can't keep it a secret forever or something, like there is that aspect of
it. Yeah. So the thing is, if you're getting results, nobody cares.
Yeah.
And it's not about trying to keep it secret. It's about not emphasizing it and just focusing on, we're going to make, I'm in charge of engineering. I'm in charge of product delivery. I'm the project manager, whatever your role is. I'm going to make the most intelligent decisions that maximize productivity.
Yeah.
And we're going to do those things that maximize productivity. That's why you have me in this role. Yep. Right. But you're not trying to get them to understand, the ego and production capability. And like, if they want to learn about it and they're curious, you can say, you're doing these interesting things. Can you share more about why you're doing this? And then you can start to, as Austin was saying, have a Socratic discussion with them about, well, let's talk about what will happen. Let's talk about what's important about people's motivation. What's important about people having the right skills. What's important. And you start to explore that if they want to. But usually, if there's a small culture gap, then yeah. But mostly we're dealing with traditional organizations with people who don't get it. So again, please keep yourself safe out there. Like, do not. Yeah. Lots of people say you gotta stand up and be bold. I've heard so many people say that. No, that's how you get fired. That's not, and then you can't help anybody. Please do not do that. Help your team by just saying, okay, we're gonna focus on production. Absolutely, we will only do things that focus on production. Yes, and then you go learn, because that's going to get the most production done in that quarter. And then you're doing what they ask you to do. You're just doing it in the most intelligent way that they can't comprehend because of their limitations, of their experience, and so on. But we're not making them bad or judging them. We're just working with them in the best way possible for their benefit and our benefit and the team's benefit.
Nice. Yeah, and we are coming up on time, so I'll give you your last moment here to plug or close. But the one thing I'll add is, I think you're 100% right in many contexts. There's no need to be an exhibitionist and overly transparent and stand up to the firing squad or whatever in an unnecessary way. But I think there have been contexts I've been in where, to quote another movie, the Lego movie, where he, unleash the micromanagers, you know what I mean? And so it's literally like people overlooking like keystrokes and the commits and being like, wait, we didn't say you could do unit testing. Like, what are you doing? Like, cut that, you know what I mean? Or like, you know, where they're so involved in the micro details with the pressure cooker that at some point I've seen you do need some courage. But I'll let you respond to that, and then also share or
Well,
plug anything you want before we close the show.
you
Well,
baited me in there too. So I did run into a guy who never committed his unit tests. So he had his entire unit test suite on his computer, but never checked it in. So I've actually seen that in the wild. So I'll let you go ahead.
That's beautiful.
I'm going to stop talking now, though.
So again, in that situation, we just say, look, you're operating a culture bubble, and you have adapters to communicate with the outside world in the language they want. And it's like we're paying taxes for the privilege of running this evolutionary culture bubble, this, you know, people-centric, learning-centric, you know, more evolved way of functioning inside a traditional organization. We have to pay our taxes. And sometimes the tax load gets so high that we make a decision. Do I want to keep on paying these taxes here? Or is the tax rate so high that I just want to go somewhere else? Right. So in that situation where you're ready to go somewhere else, if you can't be successful, then sure, you can draw a line. No problem, because it doesn't, you're okay with either outcome. You're okay with them saying, okay, you know what? We're not going to do it your way, you know, either change or get out. And you're like, okay, yeah, I'm out of here. Right. But like, unless you're prepared to do that, and the tax rate is so high, usually the tax rate is not so high. It's not so invasive that there are opportunities to create culture bubbles. Usually the biggest problem with these bubbles is we as leaders do not know how to create them and keep them healthy. And that's part of our work, is to get people to learn how to do that. But like, this is our job as leaders, to learn how to be stewards of these bubbles, right? And if we don't know how to do that, it's like, you know, there's a lot more going on here than just programming and software.
For sure. Great point. And that's I think that's a great close to the show. But anything you like to plug or share before we close? It looks like you've written some books and things. So yeah. What you got there?
Well, so really, if anyone's interested in some of the stuff I was sharing here, you know, our book Leading Beyond Change, it's like this 350-page tome on this is how to move from a traditional culture to an evolutionary culture. This is how to create culture bubbles. This is how to, you know, give people, individuals and leaders, you know, the patterns to start dissolving the ego outside of these kinds of, you know, mobbing sessions. So it's kind of like this universal pattern that, you know, you don't need to write code in order to make a shift. But really, I just want to just thank you for this time and space. I mean, I think this is really such an important aspect, and mob programming is such a like just amazing technology for the world, for not just, you know, helping people, you know, create better products and get work done, but for really helping free people from, you know, this ego-based structure that we're all kind of emerging out of into a more beautiful and beneficial world for everyone.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And thanks for coming on the show. This was a fantastic discussion that I really enjoyed. And to our audience, please do all the social media things, you know, like, subscribe, comments. We want to hear your opinions. We want to engage in conversation with you. So we'd love to hear from you. Please share this episode with anybody else you would, as a way to maybe invite them into a similar type conversation. And Michael, thanks so much for being on the show and for sharing your insights and experiences. And looking forward to our future conversations with you. And to our audience, mob on and have a good one. See you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.